Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with my December wrap-up. So as with November, I didn't actually read as many books as I have been doing recently, which I always try and keep my December reading pretty low-key anyway, so I was okay with that. So I'm actually going to be filming this all in one part. And the first book I finished in December was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. This was our pick for Past It Classics in December, or it was for November, and we did our live show in the first few days of December. That was on Julia's channel. I will link Julia and Taylor, my co-hosts, down below. And this is one of the lesser-known Bronte novels, by the lesser-known Bronte, unfortunately. So we start out this novel in a small English village or community, and we're following Gilbert Markham, and he is writing a letter to a friend of his. And we find out that one of the things he's talking about is a time in his life when he was a young man, and this young widow moved into Wildfell Hall and became the new tenant, hence the title. And then the rest of this book we are finding out more about Helen Graham, this widow, and getting to know her better and her past and some dark secrets in her past. So Gilbert is gradually getting to know her throughout most of this book. And this was such an interesting book. As always, I will have content warnings listed in the description. I do encourage you to check those if you need to, because this book deals with quite a few heavy topics, especially for the time period. It really deals with some difficult subject matter in I think a way that was very thoughtful. And I thought this book was excellent. I really enjoyed the characters. Even Gilbert, who he can be kind of frustrating, but I think the way that he is allowed to reflect on his actions when he was younger, I think that softens some of his more annoying personality traits. I actually found him really likable, much more likable than I expected to, at least, and I really loved Helen. She is such a fantastic main character. Apparently some reviewers think that she's too perfect, and we discussed in the live show, which I will link in the description, none of the three of us really felt like that. She's definitely a good person, but she does make mistakes, she does have internal conflict, and I think she's a great example of how you can have a character who's a good person and not have them be boring. I think that's sometimes something that people forget, and we kind of assume that if somebody is a consistently good person or character, then therefore they're not interesting or they can't have any internal struggle, and that's absolutely not true. I also really enjoyed the writing. It starts off kind of like comedy of manners almost, it's very clever, and the banter between Helen and Gilbert is just really enjoyable, and then we start getting into the more serious elements, but I think that throughout the book the writing was just really excellent. The only thing I didn't love about this book is there's a large chunk in the middle where we're actually focusing more on Helen and on her life and what happened, and I think that was a really important part of the book and really well done. I think that for me personally, I would have liked it to be maybe a little bit shorter, but I don't think it was done badly or anything. It's just personal preference. I think that we could have done without it being such a long section of the book, but it was definitely necessary, and I think it was really well written and really important, and it really made what Helen had gone through feel very immediate. One of my favorite things about this book is the way that it handled the themes. I think it was so modern and so progressive, and there's one character in particular who I think was characterized in such a modern feeling way, and it was just again, I keep saying impressive, but it was really impressive. I think that this does a lot of great social commentary on things related to marriage and things that women had to go through at the time, and they still go through today, but the different context of that time period meant that they had even fewer options and even less support. I really highly recommend this. I feel like this is a classic that is kind of under the radar. I think Anne Bronte's works in general are not super well known compared to her sisters, but I thought this was fantastic, and I gave The Tenant of Wildfell Hall 4 stars. Next, I finished Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds. So this is a nonfiction book that is adapted from the longer nonfiction work called Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, and Jason Reynolds adapted it, and so it's kind of co-written between the two of them, and this is intended for a young adult audience. And I'd heard from people that if you were planning to read both of them, you should start with Stamped, so that's what I did, and I listened to this on audio, and I have heard from many people that Jason Reynolds is a fantastic narrator. He's the one who narrates this book, and I wholeheartedly agree. He was such a fantastic narrator. He was very, I think the tone of the book and the tone of his narration was very balanced between conversational while still giving you a lot of great information. He interjected some humor now and then while also keeping the material very serious when it needed to be, because this is dealing with some serious issues. I think that this is a really fantastic overview of racism in the United States, and I also like that it went back in time a lot further than we usually do when we're talking about racism. Generally, I think when you're talking about racism and anti-blackness specifically in the US, a lot of times people start with slavery, which definitely makes sense. But this book, and I assume Stamped from the Beginning, actually starts before that to the creation race as a concept, which was also connected to slavery, but was not a specifically American thing. And it was really interesting. I think that was very useful information and really valuable. I also think this book did a really good job of explaining the like different terms and everything. Like 3 that are really important are racists, assimilationists, and anti-racists. And I think the book did a good job of defining those and showing the differences, and also showing how one person at different times of their life can be one or the other. Like you're not locked into one for your whole life, and it's an ongoing battle to continue to be an anti-racist or to become an anti-racist. I just think this was a really excellent, useful book. I obviously, as I'm an adult, so I don't think you have to be a teen to get something out of this, but I do think it did a good job of making the material approachable for a younger audience while still being useful to readers of all ages. So yeah, I thought the content was excellent, the writing was great, it was brilliantly narrated, and I gave Stamped 5 stars. Next, I finished Out of My Mind by Sharon M. Draper. This is a contemporary novel, and we're following our main character Melody, and she has cerebral palsy, and she's really, really smart, but nobody thinks that she is because of her physical disabilities and the fact that she can't speak or communicate in the same way that other people do. And this book is about when she gets the opportunity to finally begin to communicate and how that opens up her world. The first part of this book is also kind of a slice of life story about Melody's life and her family and her classes at school and everything. All of the ways that Melody's life is really difficult just because people are not prepared to accept her, and because the way that the world is set up against people like Melody, against people with disabilities. And I thought this book was really well done. I first heard about this book from my friend Olivia Savannah at Olivia's Catastrophe. I'll link the video down below where her and her sister talk about it, and her sister was able to review some of the wheelchair and disability wrap. So I had heard good things about this, and like I said, I think this book was really well done. I really loved Melody as a character. You really get such a clear sense of who she is and the way that she feels so trapped because she doesn't feel like people are listening to her. Well, a lot of people aren't listening to her, and the way that they make assumptions based on their own prejudices. But we also see that she has allies. Like we see that her mother and her other family members and one of her neighbors and like different people in her life do go to bat for her. They do fight to get her the resources that she needs and that she deserves. I really loved her neighbor, Miss Violet. She was such a fun character. And the book also shows how, you know, people aren't perfect. Like her mom does get frustrated sometimes, and it's not Melody's fault, but it's something that the book deals with and shows. I just think the characters in general were really well done and really believable. Some of them in this book made me absolutely furious, the way that they treated Melody, and there were definitely some parts of this book that were difficult to read. And I think something else this book shows really well is the way that people in general judge other people's intelligence based on things like language. And we see this in a lot of different ways. Like we see this with Melody, obviously, because she's not able to speak and therefore communicate like most people do. So we see people assume that she's not smart. We also see this in the world with people judging others based on accents and things like that. And I also really liked that even though we did cover other characters in this book and other themes and other ideas, it never felt like Melody wasn't being centered in her own story, which I really liked. And yeah, I just thought this was really good. I gave Out of My Mind 4 stars. Next, I finished Christmas Around the World by Emily Kelly, illustrated by Joni Oltien-Bruns. And this is a very short like children's book that talks about different Christmas traditions and ways of celebrating Christmas around the world in both the northern and southern hemispheres. I really liked this. This was very short, so not a lot to say about it. I really enjoyed the variety of countries and customs that it covered. I thought the illustrations were nice. The only thing I wish would have been different is I think some of the sections felt a lot shorter than others. Like most of them were pretty short, but there were a few sections where I wish we had gotten more details, and I just wish that that level of detail had been consistent throughout the book. But overall, I really liked this. It was a really fun thing to read around Christmas, and I gave Christmas Around the World 4 stars. I feel like almost every wrap up now, I spill water on myself off camera, so that's fun. It's not completely my fault. My current water bottle that I have is kind of a pain and it's extremely leaky, but it's still frustrating. Anyway, the next book I finished in December was Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky by Kwame Mavalia. This is a book in the Rick Riordan Presents imprint, and this is the first book in a series. And as with all of the Rick Riordan Presents books, it is own voices. And in this book, it really deals a lot with African folklore and especially African American folklore. So folk heroes like John Henry and Brer Rabbit and characters like that. We follow our main character Tristan Strong, who is struggling after the death of his best friend, and he ends up going to stay with his grandparents for a little while. And while he's there, he makes a mistake that sort of unleashes some supernatural forces, and he ends up being transported to this world called Midpass, which is the world of all of these folklore characters and everything, and he realizes that he is going to have to team up with some of these other characters in order to stop this supernatural threat that he unwittingly unleashed. And I really liked this. I thought Tristan as a main character was so well written and so great. I just really enjoyed him. He was really complex, and you really felt for him with all that he was going through, and the fact that he's now trying to understand this whole world that he didn't know about, trying to understand his own abilities. And that was another thing that I really enjoyed, is the focus on storytelling in this book and on what stories mean and why they're important. We eventually find out that one of Tristan's abilities is related to storytelling, and I thought the way that was done was just absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed those parts of the book. I also loved the elements of folklore in this book and the characters that we met connected to that. Actually, one of my favorite characters really surprised me. It ended up being Gum Baby, and the reason I'm surprised is because I think that the way she was written, she could have very easily turned into a, I guess, like kind of annoying character, but for some reason I just found her super endearing and funny, and I really enjoyed her. I say for some reason, but I think it's because Kwame Mabalia just is such a good writer, and he wrote her in such an engaging and fun way, that even when she was being kind of annoying and she was annoying Tristan, I just found her a really lovable character anyway. I also really enjoyed John Henry's character and some of the other characters that we meet in this book as well, and I also loved the themes of this book, and the way that the conflict of this book is tied to the history of anti-blackness in America, and especially slavery. I think that was done in a way that didn't feel heavy-handed. Instead, it just felt very meaningful and very well incorporated with the story. Like, the symbolism of some of the enemies that they face throughout this book, I think was just really effective and really well done. And I also liked that Kwame Mabalia trusted his readers to make those connections. Like, some of them he didn't spell out for us. He kind of just let us draw conclusions ourselves, which I thought was really well done. And really the only like kind of disappointment I had with this book is with some of Tristan's companions. I can't remember their names, but one of them is a rabbit who he's traveling with, and one of them is, I think, a human girl, but she's like from this world of Mid-Pass. And I liked them, but I just wanted, I think, more development from them, because I think by comparison, like, Tristan is such a fantastically developed protagonist, and the other like folklore type characters were so larger than life and everything, that in comparison the other companions he had felt a little flat to me. Like, I didn't dislike them. I think they have a lot of potential, and I hope that in the next books in the series we get more development for them, but their characterization felt a little flatter than a lot of the other characters in the book. And I think that was especially noticeable because I think we're supposed to feel that Tristan and them have a significant friendship already, and I just didn't feel that as much as I might have. But other than that, I really loved this. I'm really excited to get to the sequel, and I gave Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky 4 stars. Next, I finished The Christmas Miracle of Jonathan Toomey by Susan Wojciechowski, illustrated by P.J. Lynch, and this is a picture book that I heard about from my friend Katie at A Sea of Tomes, and I have since heard that it's a book that a lot of people really love and grew up with. I had never read this one, but I loved it. We're following Jonathan Toomey, who is kind of a grump. He's a woodworker who's very talented, but not super great with people. And a young widow and her son end up going to him to ask him to do some work for them, and it's something that they need by Christmas. And I thought this was just lovely. I thought the illustrations were beautiful. Let's see if I can find a good one. I just really loved the illustrations. I really liked the message and the story itself. Like, for me at least, I found it sweet without being like overly saccharine or anything. I thought it was really lovely. And really my only complaint with this one is I wanted a longer ending. And I know it's a picture book, but I think that with the way the story was building up, I thought we were going to get a little bit longer of a resolution than we did, or a little bit more of a resolution, but otherwise I loved this, and I gave The Christmas Miracle of Jonathan Toomey 4.5 stars. I believe I read this on Christmas Day, and it was just absolutely lovely. The next book I finished was The House on the Strand by Daphne du Maurier, and I can't find my copy of this book. I don't know what happened to it, since like I haven't been leaving the house, obviously. Yeah, so I mean, it's not really a huge disappointment because I hated this book and I was going to unhaul it anyway, but anyway, here's a picture of the edition I read. I buddy read this with my friend Mary Margaret, and we both hated this book. We both did extensive Goodreads reviews explaining why we hated this book, which I will link down below. So we follow our main character Richard, and he agrees to kind of be part of this experiment that his friend is doing, where essentially he takes a substance and it transports him back several hundred years, I think to like the 1300s, to the same place where he's currently living in Cornwall. And the rest of the book is kind of divided between him going back in time and getting like really kind of like fixated on this past timeline and the people that he sees there, because that's another thing, is he can't actually interact with them, he can only observe. So part of the book is spent on that, and part of the book is spent with him in the present day, and we see how this obsession is kind of like affecting his relationships and his life, although honestly a lot of his relationships are not that great to begin with. Yeah, as I've already said, I really hated this book. The only good things I can really say about it is I thought the concept was interesting, and we do eventually get a couple of minor characters who I think are much better developed than most of the other ones. But even them, their storyline was so disappointing. Yeah, so where do I even begin with the things I didn't like about this book? First off, the writing. I tend to really like Daphne du Maurier's writing. I have read 2 books by her that I really enjoyed, and in this one I just didn't like it. It was like the way that it was focused on descriptions of things that didn't matter got very irritating. Like, Richard has this really annoying habit of over and over trying to map the present day like geography onto the past and vice versa, and he will just spend pages walking around and doing this, and like I tend to have a hard time picturing certain kinds of like geographical descriptions in books anyway, so this was just not fun for me. And he just kept doing it over and over, and there was no point to it. And it was also like, this book was written in such a confusing way, because like he would go back in time and he would just be making guesses about who these people were or how they were related to each other. And then in the present timeline is when you would actually sometimes get things explained, which I think was one of the reasons I actually liked the present timeline more, even though I normally, like in general, when there's books that have a historical timeline in a present day, I will basically always prefer the historical one, but this one I didn't. And one of the reasons is because in the present day we actually got some answers, but even that was done confusingly, because like Richard would find things out, but then like he would restate them in a way where like it was not clear if he was wrong before or how much he was wrong before. And another reason I preferred the present day timeline is because there was more dialogue and like more actually interesting things happening. Also, we actually got a more interesting character in the form of Richard's friend Magnus, who's the one kind of doing this experiment. Like, he was not a nice person, but he was at least interesting. And speaking of not nice people, Richard sucked. Like, he was just such a horrid main character to follow. It was really unpleasant being in his head for the whole book. He's obnoxious, he's misogynistic, he's kind of dumb sometimes, like he just makes like nonsensical choices. He treats his wife like shit, and the way it's written, I feel like we're supposed to kind of sympathize with him, when really the only flaws I can see in his wife is one, that she's American, and that is told to us so that we know that we shouldn't like her. Which, another pet peeve of mine is when characters who are not American write characters who are, but they speak exactly like everybody else. She did not speak like an American character at all, so that was like a very minor thing I found annoying. But yeah, so we're supposed to hate Vita, his wife, because she's American, and because she cares about the way that Richard treats her. And I really don't know what else. Like, that's it. She'll call him on his horrible treatment of her and her sons, who are her sons from, I think, a previous marriage. And yeah, that's it. That's why we're supposed to hate Vita. And I got real sick of it. Richard also apparently sort of falls in love with or develops a crush on this woman Isolde from the past timeline. This despite the fact that he has never communicated with her. Like, he hasn't even observed her that much. Like, that was another big problem with this book, is like, we're supposed to buy that Richard is so fixated on this past timeline that he starts risking his own life in order to continue to travel back in time. And I just don't buy it, because we're never given anything believable about why Richard finds this so interesting. Like, I guess in principle, yes, it would be a very interesting experience to get to, you know, witness the past like this, but it's not like he's able to talk to these people and get to know them. And it's not like he even observed that many interesting events. Like, there's this one chapter that me and Mary Margaret were laughing about, where like the big dramatic thing that happened in that chapter in the past was that he almost saw someone start a rebellion, but then they didn't. They had to go back home. It was just like so weird. Like, the plotting of this book was all over the place. Also, the thing with Richard too that was weird is like, Mary Margaret and we couldn't figure out if we were supposed to hate him. Like, Daphne du Maurier has written like trash characters before, but generally I feel like you can kind of tell that she's doing it on purpose. And here it wasn't clear. It's like, is this a deliberate authorial choice or just internalized misogyny? Who can tell? And then another thing that I really, really hated about this book is this has to have one of the worst and most unsatisfying endings I have ever read. It was so bad, and I'm gonna spoil it for y'all. So if you want to read this book, skip to the timestamp that I put in the description. But if you don't and you want to hear why I'm so angry, keep watching. So this book ends with the only two characters who had some potential for growth or development or just being interesting, who are Roger and Isolde, and they're both characters from the past. So Richard like keeps going back in time to the point where it's like really drastically affecting his health, and he keeps doing it because he's so fixated on this past timeline and these people that he doesn't really know at all. And so then he like risks a lot to go back this one last time. And the thing with this time travel too is he's always at different points in the timeline, so he never knows where he's gonna, like when he's going to end up. So he gets to the past and he looks around and everything is like super creepy and really quiet and he doesn't know what's going on. And he keeps walking through the town and there's clearly something terrible has happened and there's not many people around and everything. And then the big reveal happens and it's the plague. Everybody died of the plague. Like that's the resolution for this book, including the only characters that we really care about, because he gets back there and Roger is currently dying of the plague. And we find out that Isolde died from it like years ago, and that Roger killed her to like put her out of her misery because she was already sick from it and he knew that. And it was just the weirdest reveal, like the way that was treated. And yeah, then Roger dies, and like when Richard comes back to the present, his reaction is basically like, closure, like I can move on. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like that is one of the least satisfying things I have ever read, and he's just like, I can move on with my life now. And I just did not understand it. I hated the fact that Roger and Isolde, who were, again, the only characters who ended up being somewhat interesting, got such a shitty ending. Because like we also find out that Roger was like, he eventually fell in love with her, but he was a steward and she was like a noble lady, so it was never gonna work. But like we kind of wanted to see what was gonna happen with them. Well, guess what happened with them? The plague. Yeah, I'm so angry about this. And then when Richard does get back to the present day, he starts feeling like really sick again, and the book ends with him like not being able to pick up a phone because he's had like issues with his health and with his body not really obeying his commands like earlier in the book, and that's like where the book ends. And if I hadn't seen somebody reference in a Goodreads review an interview that Daphne du Maurier did about the end of the book and what she thought happened, which is that I think that Richard was going to be paralyzed for life, like I would have no idea what was supposed to have happened to him at the end of the book. Like I thought maybe we were supposed to think that he was gonna die from this. I feel like I've been rambling a lot, but honestly that's probably appropriate for this book because it made like very little sense. It was really infuriating. Like it's one of those books where I get to the end and I'm like, what was the point? Like what was the story trying to do? Like I don't understand what the message was, if there was one, or even if what we were supposed to get from this story. I don't understand what Richard's journey was supposed to be. Like the fact that we're just told that he got closure at the end after we just witnessed this horribly unsatisfying ending just boggles my mind. Yeah, so I hated House on the Strand. I gave it 2 stars, but honestly I'm like, is it lower than that? Maybe. But as I've said before, I try to save 1-star ratings for books that are like really actively harmful. And even though House on the Strand had some really unhealthy attitudes towards women, I don't feel like it's quite in the tier of other things I've rated 1 stars, but like, yeah, I hated this. It had very few redeeming qualities. I do not recommend this. Yeah, this book has quite good reviews on Goodreads, so I don't know what I'm missing, but yeah, Mary Margaret and I, neither of us liked this one. And sadly, we're going to end this wrap up on another negative note because the last book I have to talk about was The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. I'm really sorry I don't actually have the translator of the edition I read because I read an ebook copy through my library that did not actually note the translator. So I'm sorry I can't give you that information, but yeah, so this was our Past It Classics book club for December. And Taylor was the one who hosted that. I will link that live show down below. And this is a French classic that we're following our main character D'Artagnan, who kind of sets off to make his fortune, and he ends up in Paris and he wants to be a musketeer. And for most of the book he's not actually a musketeer, which I guess is why it's called the Three Musketeers, even though there's four guys who are the main characters. But he ends up joining like the King's Guard or something, and he makes friends with the other Three Musketeers, who are Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. And the book is like basically a swashbuckling adventure where they, can you say swashbuckling if they're not pirates? I don't know. But it's, yeah, like they're running around fighting people. There's some political intrigue. One of the main antagonists is the Cardinal, who is, he's like one of the king's advisors, but they are against each other. They don't like each other. And then one of the other antagonists is this woman known as Milady, who is a really dangerous spy and murderer, and she's working for the Cardinal. And I don't really know how to summarize this because the plot was kind of all over the place. Sadly, I also did not like this book. I originally read it a couple years ago and I gave it a 3 stars. And this time I gave it a 2 stars, and it's like barely a 2 stars. The things I liked are, I think the writing itself was enjoyable and quick to read. And I think some of the banter was really great. Like if this book had been more of just the 4 guys hanging out and joking with each other and just like having fun adventures and giving each other a hard time, I would have enjoyed this so much more. But yeah, I ended up not liking it at all this time. And I really am wondering why I enjoyed it even as much as I did last time. I think partly I had the excitement of at least not knowing where the story was going. And I think also some of the things that really bothered me this time around, some of them are like throwaway lines where if you don't stop and think about a particular sentence, you wouldn't necessarily known that something terrible has happened and been brushed off. So maybe it was just that I didn't pick up on them that time, but yeah, I had a lot of issues with this book. First, on just like a storytelling level, the plot was all over the place, and there was a lot of time spent on things that I either found not interesting or just like very frustrating. I also hated the characters for reasons that I'll get into later, but yeah, there were really very few characters that I actually cared about, and the ones that I did were very minor characters who deserved better. But the main characters I did not like at all, especially D'Artagnan and Athos. I could not stand them, and I really resented the way that the book kept trying to tell us what good guys they were when demonstrably they are not. I also think the relationships were really poorly done in this book. Like this is again a case of the book telling us something but not backing it up with the story. Like we're told of like what great friends these guys are, and they kind of aren't. Like I don't know, we don't really see them interacting as friends that much in a way that like would make their devotion to each other believable. The romantic angles were awful to read. And that brings me to my biggest issues with this book, which are the rampant misogyny and classism. And this is another thing that we talked about a lot in that live show, but I just could not stand it. Like this book is an example to me of how something that's even worse than not having any female characters in your book is treating them like this. And standard disclaimer about how I read a lot of classics, and I know going in that like not to expect a modern perspective necessarily, but this was just so much worse than I even remembered or than I expected. I'm going to get into spoilers here, so I will put a timestamp if you want to skip this part. But yeah, I could not stand the way that this book treated female characters, and just like another thing that bothered me about it is it wasn't even like these women were portrayed badly or were used in a really horrible way. It's like we're supposed to extrapolate from this that all women are like this. And I really hated that. And again, like I expect a certain amount of sexism, sadly, from many classics, but I think there's a bar, and the main character raping women and another main character hanging his wife from a tree as punishment, I think those do not meet that bar. So D'Artagnan rapes Milady, and before that, I think he actually rapes a maid named Kitty who falls in love with him for some reason. But it even says that like after he does this to her, or as he's doing this to her, she's thinking like, well, she can't let Milady know that they're hiding in this other room, so it's just quieter if she doesn't resist. And that was disgusting. That's one of those things where like if you weren't paying attention, you might have missed that part because it's a very small thing that's just kind of brushed off. And yeah, Athos, like the fact that he finds out, because he was actually married to Milady, and he finds out that she has been branded as a thief, and so his response to that is to hang her from a tree, which is really awful. And like Milady herself I hated her as a character, but I also hated the way that she was treated. Like, she's a despicable human being, but I really resent the way that the book made me agree with the male characters about needing to get rid of her. Like, I hate the fact that she's the only villain who actually gets killed. Like, all of these other bad guys who we have been told to think of as like the antagonists and like the people who are in charge of all these bad things happening, like the Cardinal, who we are meant to hate, like him and the Musketeers and D'Artagnan just get like buddy-buddy at the end of the book and they make up. But Milady gets her head cut off. And it's really hard not to notice that the female villain is the only one who gets punished. And even though I hated Milady, I hated her as a character, I didn't like her scenes, I really did not want her in the book anymore. Like, in a way, I'm glad that she got some comeuppance, but like, I hate that she was the only one who did. And also, the other thing about Milady is, like, even though she's a terrible person, her motivations at least make sense. Like, she's the character out of all of them who is the most, I guess, logical in what causes her to do what she does. Like, as Julia pointed out in our live show, it's like, why would you spend the most time out of this huge book developing your antagonist? Like, it really, and like not the main characters, like it doesn't make sense, especially given how much we're clearly supposed to hate Milady, and just like the sexist language used throughout this book, and the way that like even the narrator of the book would like break the action of the story to almost like directly address the reader about how stupid and useless women are. And then also, like, as I mentioned, the classism of this book was also really horrible. Like, the way that these main characters treated their lackeys was appalling. At one point, Athos actually wagers like his servant, like as part of a bet. And like they're treated like objects. They're regularly beaten and it's treated as like a moment of comedy almost. It's just super disturbing. Like, we talked in our discussion about like the possibility that maybe they're indentured servants of some kind, because honestly, how else could you explain them staying with these horrible people, much less like being as devoted to them as they are? It's like the book doesn't even realize that the main characters are despicable people. It's like, this is a story about heroes and therefore everyone loves them. The way that the book keeps telling you how these characters, like especially Athos, are like such gentlemen, and like that's why they have like such good manners and they're so like everyone loves them so much and all of this, and it's like, even when we have seen them act in these horrible ways, it's just very hard to stomach. Yeah, I have a whole ranty Goodreads review on this book as well, so again, I will link that down below. I don't feel like I was even very coherent about the things that I hated, but hopefully you got the gist. Basically, the story was not interesting, like the conflict was not always super compelling, I think the characters were poorly developed, I think the relationships were poorly developed, especially considering like how a lot of the story hangs on you believing these relationships. Like, there's multiple love affairs that were just completely unconvincing. And more than all of this, I think that the treatment of the lower class characters and of the women in this book, and the way that that extended to just like women in general, was just really disgusting to read, honestly, and it made for an incredibly unpleasant reading experience. I gave it 2 stars, but I'm actually thinking about dropping this one because I think, given some of the things I've talked about, it might actually fit that 1-star rating of actively harmful. Yeah, I just really hated this book. I do still plan to read The Count of Monte Cristo by this author, but I guess I just have to hope that there's no female characters in it. Yeah, The Three Musketeers was really not for me. Okay, everybody, so that was my December wrap-up. I know we kind of ended on 2 downer notes in a row, but like, I had to finish The Three Musketeers soon anyway for our, I think our live show was in January, and then I was also, Mary Margaret and I were just hating House on the Strand so much that we were like, we're gonna push through, and so I was actually hoping to finish both of those books that I was hating before the end of the year and not carry those into 2021, which I am very glad I did. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!